Well, hey guys, thanks for tuning into the channel. I am here with Ray and Megan. They are missionaries to Japan, and we're going to hear from them. But before we do, if you have not done so already, you can hit the like and subscribe and comment and do all of the things that help the YouTube algorithm out. It helps a bunch and it's encouraging to me. So feel free to do that, or don't, whatever you want to do. But it helps a brother out. So anyways, we're here with Ray and Megan. Ray, I had you for I think only one class in our DTS career. And Megan, I actually have never talked to you or really met you before. So hi, it's great to meet you. Maybe we should have done this part before we recorded, but that's
Yeah,
okay. It's good to
yeah.
meet you. But I had Ray for a C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien class. I think that
Mhm.
was the only class we had together.
Probably what also we were in one of the Hebrew classes, I
Were
think,
we?
together.
Okay. Okay. So we had both Hebrew and the J.R. Tolkien class were some of my favorite classes. I
Yeah,
loved
yeah,
them both for different reasons. Very different reasons, but they were just fascinating, and I've followed your journey through social media from DTS to now in Japan
yeah.
and doing the Lord's work over there. The two of you, not just Ray, the two of you doing the Lord's work over there. So thanks for being on the podcast, man. I really appreciate it.
We really are grateful. We get
Yeah,
really excited to share
we do.
what the
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lord is doing and just kind of have opportunities to do this is a blessing to us and very encouraging to us. So thank you for having us.
Yes.
Oh no, thank you. And hey, you know what? I Ministry is a thankless profession or whatever people say. But I just want to throw it out there, like, thanks for what y'all do. Like, it really is such an impactful thing. There is very few people that I know that would be willing to do what y'all have done and to sacrifice the things that y'all have done, the things that you have sacrificed, and to learn this new random language, not for anime. Many people
Yeah.
do it for anime, but for the glory of God and for the kingdom. It's really an admirable thing, and I want to thank you for that publicly because I know sometimes maybe you don't hear it. So just wanted to say that. Anyways, so as we're kind of starting the interview, maybe you guys could introduce yourselves, give us a 2 minute, 3 minute summary of your lives and how you ended up together, seminary, and how you ended up in Japan and all that.
Yeah, I can start.
Yeah.
Uh, I was born in New York City. My parents are from Puerto Rico. So I was born in Brooklyn, New York. We lived there for 7 years, and then my parents decided to move back to the island. So we moved back when I was 7. I did not know Spanish when we moved back, so that was a cultural
Wow.
adjustment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I grew up. I learned to love Puerto Rico. Grew up there, and just kind of the culture there. My parents still live there, uh, and growing up in a Latin American culture, it was mostly Catholic. So we grew up in a Catholic household. My parents were not really practicing Catholics, so it was just more cultural than anything else. So I wasn't really grew up in a Christian household. Yeah, they were Catholic, but it wasn't like practicing. So it wasn't, I went to high school that I had some friends that invited me to church and I became a Christian as a 16-year-old. Yeah, and since then the Lord has really done some great things in my life. I ended up went to college in Puerto Rico, then moved back to New York for work, and I worked in finance for 4 years. And then the Lord kind of disrupted that a little bit and ended up on the mission field for a year.
Hmm.
And that's kind of where I felt really that this was what the Lord was calling me to do. It was like one of those, that year was one of those that experiences that the Lord really used to kind of consolidate and redefine my calling and what he wanted me to do. So I got back from that. I'm like, oh, well, now what? I'm back in New York. I don't know
Yeah.
what to do. So I moved to Texas for work, not thinking I was going to go to seminary, but I knew I wanted to do long-term missions and
Hmm.
I needed some more training, biblical training, good theological training. So ended up going to DTS after a year or so in Texas. And while at church in Texas, that's where we met. We met at church. Uh, yeah, and we got married throughout when I was in my third year of seminary, which is kind of crazy because seminary is kind of busy and crazy. And then we got married, and it was all kind of like, whoa, this everything's happening. So, but it was great. The Lord was
Yeah.
good. We ended up getting married, and kind of the Lord led us to the mission field throughout that process. But I went to seminary specifically to prepare for uh, long-term missions.
Yeah.
So a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I was born in Texas, born and raised. And I was born in a Christian background. So um we would go to church regularly, and I accepted Christ at the age of 7. And the church that we went to was very missions oriented. And I feel like that church really did play a role when it came to my calling and to missions. And they would always have guest missionaries speak, or they would have these missions banquets. And when I was a little girl, I would just get really excited every time there was some type of missions event. I was just curious about these individuals who left their comforts of their home country to go abroad, and to serve the Lord. But it was really their stories that just kind of tugged my heart a little bit. And when I was 13, there's a missionary in particular who just shared his story, growing up in the US, and how the Lord utilized what he went through in the US and overseas in a mission on the mission field. And when he was sharing his testimony, I kind of felt like, well, maybe the Lord is calling me to missions, but I'm 13, so I didn't really know what that meant, but I was like, sure, Lord, I'll go. I had no idea where he would send me. I just knew I wanted to be a missionary. And that kind of was always in the back of my mind when I went to college or the jobs I took. It was always in the back of my mind of, I'm called to be a missionary, so that's what I want to do. Yeah, as Ray said, we met in 2017-ish, got married in 2019, and missions is actually something that kind of brought us together. We both kind of had a heart and a passion to reach the unreached, and after conversations, we thought, maybe this is a relationship that
that the Lord wants. It was really interesting.
Yeah.
It was kind of like an awkward conversation, because a friend of ours was like, hey, so Megan, you should ask Ray what he wants to do. And I'm like, okay, I'm sitting right here. I can hear you say that. Yeah, and she was like, oh yeah, I would love to do some mission work. And that's kind of how everything started.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Wow, that's awesome. So y'all had your first year and a half of marriage and then COVID started, or the first year of marriage and then COVID started. So that must have been interesting.
Yeah, that's
it
true.
was. When you're coming on the mission field, one of the questions they ask, because it's an adjustment for a married couple, it's like, what does the adjustment look like when you come on the mission field and you're working together as a couple consistently? And we're like, well, we kind of went through that through COVID. We were like together all the time.
Yeah, it was good training ground for sure. Absolutely. So, I'll just run back to something that you said. You said that you were working in finance, and then there was a disturbance or a disruptance or something. What did that look like, or what happened there? If you're willing to share.
Yeah, of course. So I was working in finance in a company for around almost 4 years. And I was at the point, it was like, emotionally, I was just exhausted. Like, if you ask my family, they knew I was miserable. It was really hard. I was doing well, like at work, like it wasn't anything in terms of performance at work or work related, but it was just really hard season. So I decided to go to graduate school. I was going to go to graduate school for business. So throughout that time, I had probably 2-month period before school started. So I was praying and say, oh, maybe I was always interested in some cross-cultural experience with missions. It was always in my heart since high school, which one of my good friends, his parents were missionaries in Africa for 4 years, and their experience really marked me. So I was always processing, maybe I would love to have an experience of serving God overseas, but never really thought about it. But I had 2 months, and I was like, well, let me consider something for these 2 months. And that turned into a year-long experience. But it was kind of an emotional, difficult season that the Lord utilized to kind of change the direction of kind of my life, because I would have probably been working in business or something completely. And that experience that I had working in the company for 4 years, that was amazing. Like, I think there's a lot of things that I do bring with me today. but it was really cool to see how in such a difficult season, how important it was for me to process that with God.
Right.
And he going to him for that, he kind of directed my steps.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So you graduated seminary. How did the whole Japan specifically with OMF and everything, how did those opportunities present themselves, and how did you make the decision about what country? Because I'm assuming you could have gone anywhere. So how did you guys narrow those decisions and decide who to partner with?
Yeah, it was definitely a journey. When we felt called to missions, at the beginning, we didn't really know where we would go. But what kind of brought us together on the same page was we both knew we wanted to go to an unreached population. So that narrows the mission field a little bit, but it's still pretty broad. And just after seeking the Lord and praying, Japan kind of kept on coming up over and over, whether it was people we met at seminary or having friends that lived in Japan. Japan just kind of kept on coming up over and over again. And we paused and we thought, well, maybe this is the Lord, trying to draw attention to Japan. And so we sat and prayed about it, and we thought, well, maybe we should just move forward and take a step of faith and go towards Japan and see what the Lord does.
We didn't have much information about Japan.
We didn't.
So when we started looking, we're like, wow, there's a huge need. It's an unreached population. So that's kind of when we're like, okay, maybe the Lord is calling us. And like Megan said, we kind of decided to look at some organizations that might work and do work here in Japan.
Yeah, and we met with a lot of different organizations, just kind of hearing their heart, their mission, their vision. And OMF was one of those organizations that stood out to us the most. And after a lot of praying, we thought, well, let's start the application process. And we just trust that if this is not from the Lord, he will close the door. But he's not. So here we are.
Here we are.
Japan.
It is a daunting to choose the right organization. I think that's an important,
it is,
very important decision when choosing to go overseas. If you're deciding to go with an organization, I think you have to look at theologically how they function as a culture. All of those questions you don't really consider. Thankfully at DTS, they helped us, like, you should think about these when you're thinking about doing missions with an organization. Yes, so the process applying took us around 2 years between starting the application to getting on the field.
Okay.
So it's not like I'm going to go, let's go tomorrow. It's quite a
journey.
Yes, it is a journey. It definitely is a journey.
Wow. And I'm sure you know this off the top of your head, maybe. What is the approximate percentage of people in Japan who profess Christianity as their faith?
So I kind of double checked the numbers this morning, actually. I was like, let me make sure.
Okay.
So it's 1.2% Christian, but from that percentage, I think it's only 0.3% evangelical Christian. So there is probably a mix of different Christian expressions within that 1.2%. So the evangelical population is quite low.
Wow. What is that like? I can't even imagine a world. The church I'm currently at, I'm recording from my church right now. Church number 1, across the street, like I can throw a rock and hit their window, is another church. In the other direction, I can throw a rock and hit the other church. And there's actually 2 churches that meet in that church. So there is 4 churches in one corner here. There's another mega church being built about a football field length from here. So I can't imagine a world where only 1% of the population claims to be Christian. What is that like?
It's, we talk about numbers.
We do.
And then we come here and it's just like, it slaps you in the face. It's just, once you experience it, it's like, wow, there is very little knowledge of what Christianity is, or a very Western perspective of Christianity, to the extent and then this is an example. Recently, we celebrated Christmas a few months ago, right? And we were talking to a Japanese person, and it's rare to say, why do you celebrate Christmas at church? Like, that's really strange. That was a
Wow.
question that a Japanese, and it's because it's a Christian holiday, but here it's not. Here is more of like a Valentine's Day, right? So for us, we have like all this knowledge of Christianity living in the US and Latin America, but here it's in Tokyo Metro, you can probably see churches sporadically, you would see, but they're very small buildings. But it is surprising to speak to people that never met a Christian, or never known anything about Christianity. It's just very common. Yeah, it was kind of a surprise, even though you know the numbers, you speak about numbers, but when you really experience it, it's surprising.
Yeah, I would have to say, because I grew up in Texas, so I know the church on many, many churches. And yeah, like what Ray said, you know that the number is very low, but then when you actually see that there are no churches, and when you do see a church, you actually are more surprised, which is kind of sad a little bit if you think about it. And then I know there are places in Japan where people drive hours and there are no churches in the area or that region. And it's very different from growing up in the US.
You see a cross, you're like, oh, there's a church over there. You get really excited, you know, it's like, oh, church right there.
But it may not be a church, it may be a wedding venue, because that's very cultural to get married in, for the younger generation to get married in what looks like a church facade. So we were in this area and we saw this cross in what looked like a church building. We're like,
it was really pretty too, very big.
It's a big church. And when we got closer, we noticed that something looked a little different, and we realized, oh, this is a wedding.
It's just a wedding venue.
Wedding venue that looks like.
So they want a Christian wedding, but it's just like the Christian facade of a wedding.
Right, just for the pictures, for the photographer.
Yes.
Wow. And that must be just incredibly difficult for you as believers. We can talk about this as well, how much support you receive from OMF and from the churches that are in your area and stuff like that. But when Easter comes around, and not only not having your family there, but your church is maybe a little bit more scattered, and how do you get to them, and the holidays and all of these things is just wow, like that is different. Y'all are real missionaries. Like I say that because I went to a college ministry back in the day, and everybody was a missionary. But people often just moved like 30 minutes away and started one of those ministries and called themselves missionaries, which is fine. You know, people are getting one for Jesus. It's all good. But they never had to deal with like being away from their family for a long time, not knowing when they'll see them, and spending Easter alone because there's no one around you. So y'all are like the real deal missionaries.
Well, Easter is really interesting because Easter, it's not they do celebrate it in churches, but it's not as celebrated as like in the States, I would say.
Okay.
And then we have Christmas. We will have Christmas events at churches and stuff. But yeah, it is very difficult.
Christmas is probably the bigger celebrations in churches. Christmas. New Year's also, I would say, around
New Year's. So in the Japanese culture, New Year's is a very big celebration, bigger than Christmas, right? Because Christmas is like a Western holiday in Japan. So New Year's is very big. So churches tend to do big Christmas and New Year's celebrations together to kind of reach people. And since people are more aware of Christmas, churches tend to do a lot more stuff because people are open to hear, what do Christmas in the US, right? Oh, what is Christmas all about? Because they are celebrating Christmas, but they don't really know what it is. So we have more opportunity to talk about that with people. So churches try to use it as an evangelical or evangelistic opportunity. While Easter, not many people know what Easter is, and they don't celebrate Easter here. So it's hard to start a conversation with somebody to talk about Easter, and it's here.
Wow,
easier
so
to see.
totally different way of doing ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some things that you're surprised to like learn about ministry in Japan that you thought, oh, this is going to work, and then it didn't work, or things that you said this could never work, and then it works amazingly in Japan? Have you experienced any of that?
Um, I would say for us, we haven't had like the opportunity to try different things out just yet. Um, but we are very surprised on how different ministry is.
Yeah.
Especially church ministry looks very different here than in the States. Um, and part of that, churches are smaller.
Yeah.
So most church activities, like you would think in the US, we have throughout the week, we'll have different events like Bible study, group fellowship groups, connect groups, or different prayer nights. In Japan, most of the events are held only on Sunday, because people typically are very busy. So work long hours,
Yeah.
very busy, or people in the church are kind of older. Most of the church population is probably pretty old. So you can't just have like all these events throughout the week. So our Sundays are really busy. Like we go to church and we have service, we have lunch with fellowship, after church together with everybody in church, and then after they might have a training or an event. So that all happens on Sunday, and that works for people here.
Yeah.
But in the week, just we don't have, they do have some stuff going on, but it isn't as active or as we would compared to what we see in the US.
Yeah.
Mm. Is that kind of
I would say, yeah.
on the top of my head? Yeah, that's kind of what stands out to me right now as we are in our kind of language learning journey. Yeah, what we've
Yeah.
noted.
Yeah. Well, that was my next question. Learning Japanese, what has that been like? What is the process of learning a new language?
That's also a journey. Yeah.
Which, before you answer, y'all posted a video maybe, I don't know, a month or two ago, maybe 2 months ago, of y'all. I don't know if you were reading a sermon or what you were reading, because I don't know Japanese. And you were reading it from a paper, right? But man, that was so cool. Like, I feel like that was fast to learn Japanese at that level. And I don't know, it seemed like a really, really cool thing to do. But yeah, those little
Yeah,
updates kind of
one of our.
inspire me every time y'all post them.
Oh,
Oh,
thank you.
I think that was actually for the New Year's Eve service at our
Probably.
church. Yeah.
Probably,
Okay.
yeah.
Just kidding.
Okay.
But yeah, language has definitely been a journey as well. Japanese is hard. It is very English. The grammar structure is completely different. They have three different writing systems, and you need to know them all. And it's been fun. So we've definitely enjoyed being able to learn Japanese. It's not something I ever thought I would be able to learn, or I never thought I would try to learn Japanese growing up. That wasn't really on my mind. But yeah, progress is, I would say, similar to learning other languages. You see progress some days, and then other days you feel like, have I learned anything? I've learned nothing. But then the next day you have positive progress again. And, we hear about when it comes to learning languages, or Japanese in particular, that it is kind of like a race, and it's a slow and steady race. It's something that you're just going to constantly be learning, and that's okay, because it's very different from English, and it's very different from what we're used to.
Yeah. So for English speakers, native English speakers, Japanese, to get to fluency, it takes probably 3 to 4 years, I say. But to be honest with you, I've missionaries, what their experience that they said to us was like, I felt really comfortable after 8 years. I'm like, what?
8 years.
Yeah. So it takes time, and we have to really hold on to those little steps of progress. And kind of what motivates us is just being able to talk to people and connect with people and share deep conversations, maybe about the gospel, about who Jesus is. That really motivates me to be able to do that. And I think about that we have in the States, we speak English. And I'm like, I had so many opportunities to speak with people and connect with people about who Christ is, and I just didn't do that as often. And here that I can't do it as well as I wish, or I can't do it, and I can only do very basic stuff. I'm like, wow, it really gave me a perspective of like, of knowing the language and being able to share with people, and going back home when we have our home assignments and being able to connect with people at a deeper level. It just having that capacity to do that is a blessing, and just it convicted me. It really
Yeah.
is a
Yeah, I feel convicted right now. For sure,
uh,
man.
yeah, but it's hard. Yeah, we take things step by step. We're very grateful for the progress we've made, but we still have a lot to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of like we take things day by day.
Yeah.
Share a little bit about what that looks like for us in terms of language learning. So OMF as an organization, Hudson Taylor, who started OMF in China many years ago, he's kind of like contextualization was one of his like things, right? He wants to engage in ways that are meaningful to the host culture, right? That in ways that they understand. So that's very an important part of our kind of organization. So for long-term missionaries, our first 2 years are kind of, we call it Daniel learning. And it's kind of focused basically on, like, Daniel learned the culture, the literature, and the language when he was in Babylon, right?
Right.
And so we're kind of in that stage of our long-term journey, especially long-term missionaries. We want to be effective in the long term, right? And part of that is learning language and culture. So these 2 years are kind of protected by our organization, because you go to a church, right? Here in Japan, we've gone to a church, and you can immediately start doing things, like, because there's a need, right? There's need for people to reach, and you can get pulled into that immediately. So our organization helps us navigate those conversations to say, okay, this season you can serve in some ways, but make sure your main focus is language learning. So we do Tuesday to Friday, we study 6 to 8 hours in a language school, 2 hours, 3 hours at the language, 2.5 hours at the language school, and then the other remaining self-study. And then on Mondays, we have a religious component to that, which is Christian language, which is not known to many Japanese people, but how to say words from the Bible, words that are often said in the Bible. And then in a few months, our course switches completely to Bible kind of Japanese. So testimony, sermon writing, sharing deep conversations. What's the Trinity? How would you share the Trinity with the Japanese people in Japanese, with the Japanese person in Japanese? Just having deeper spiritual conversations. So it's a really big cultural language learning process that we're in right now. Because it's not just language. There's a lot of cultural, the language has a lot of culture behind it. And if you don't understand the culture, but you can speak the language, you won't connect with people in meaningful ways.
Right.
So it's really important to understand Japanese culture and language together in order for you to connect well with people.
Right. And in a lot of ways, that seems like an incredibly humble posture to take, to say, I'm going to learn your culture and I'm going to submit myself to your, I don't want to say standards, but to your way of life so that I can minister to you, as opposed to jumping in there, breaking down the walls and saying, this is how we're going to do things here. Right. And then it also just, the second thing, honors their culture. Like, what you have is good, and we're not trying to strip you of that. We're just trying to get you to include this gospel truth, and it simultaneously humbles us, or humbles you, but also elevates them and honors them well. Because I know that a criticism of missionaries can be that you're just coming to Americanize us or whatever, and that's not what a missionary wants to do.
No, not at all.
Right.
Yeah, and it's really cool because you start off your first couple months in a bilingual church, right? Because you're like, okay, let's ease you in. So it's Japanese English, so you can, And then after that, we're switching to full Japanese church. So sometime last year, we started going to full Japanese church. And yeah, we're just learning. We're learning from the pastor. We're learning how they do things, what does ministry look like,
Yeah.
what are the challenges the churches face.
Yeah.
And it's humbling because we I'll let Megan share about our small group Japanese sharing experiences. Small group after church. During this church service.
Yeah, so our church, they have a really unique approach to their services, which we really appreciate. But the pastor likes to engage the congregation with a passage of scripture that he's working on throughout the sermon, throughout the day, or during that day, during service. So we'll break out in small groups and kind of share a little bit about maybe what the Lord has showed us, what we liked about the passage. And it's a really good way to get the congregation to think about the scripture. What does it say? What is the Holy Spirit telling me? But we also get to participate, which is amazing, but very challenging because our Japanese is not there to where we can just think on our feet of, oh, this is what the Lord is telling me through this passage of scripture. So the pastor does send us a scripture beforehand so we can prepare and think a little bit and write it. But it is humbling to want to be able to say something that really is on your heart, but you just don't have the language to be able to communicate that. And so you have to kind of water it down a little bit because, well, this is the grammar structure I know, and these are the vocabulary words I know. So
it's hard.
This is what I'm going to tell you today.
You feel like I have all these like deep thoughts and I just can just say, God loves me. He's gracious to me.
Lord's love.
It's really humbling. It is a very experience. But like you said, our heart is to come alongside the Japanese church, Japanese pastors. And in order to do that well, there's areas that we need to learn from them and together grow into what the Lord is calling the church to do.
Wow. And are you able to, you say you go to an all Japanese church now, are you able to sit and like really understand what he's saying at this point?
Very little chunks, little by little. So Japanese in a sense, it's very complicated because it has a lot of formal language too. So there's different ways you would speak to your boss than you would speak to your students, right? There's this whole honor system in the language, right? And we just learned that probably 2 months ago. So, and that's included in church language often. Like, I was like, oh, what is that? I've never heard that before. So you pick up certain things. But it's your spiritual nourishment is not going to come solely from Sunday. There's just no way as a language learner in a new culture that is not right. Maybe it is. There's parts of spiritual stuff that we get like through worship and through the community and fellowship and prayer together. Yes. But there's something more that has to happen, and that probably is going to happen in your own spiritual like the week walk, right? And if that's not present, you're going to struggle in the long run. So yeah, we pick up parts, and other parts we just don't understand, but I'm constantly writing new stuff and marking my Japanese Bible and trying to understand as much as possible.
Wow. Well, I'm telling you, that video that I saw a couple months ago was so encouraging. Like you went up there and you were speaking Japanese, bro, sis. Like that's super cool. So I was really encouraged. Like it was really cool. Anyways, random question. This randomly just, how often do you see another Hispanic?
Very
rare. But when I do, I get really excited. It's really rare.
It is.
So we're in the city that we're in, it's probably like 40 minutes out of central Tokyo. right? 30 minutes or so on train. So we're pretty close, but we're like in a different state or prefecture, right? But relatively close. If you go to central Tokyo, you're gonna see foreigners, right? There's no doubt you'll see foreigners. But for us being that close, we don't see as many foreigners here
Yeah.
at all. Not many English speakers, or there's just not much English in our day-to-day stuff at all. So it's really surprising how, like, I'm so close to Tokyo, but there's not many foreigners
Yeah.
here. So Hispanics, not many. And then in OMF, I think, am I the only Hispanic right now?
No, Liliana. She's
Liliana,
Colombian.
yes, we had
Okay.
a Colombian
And then a
she's
Serb Asian
Colombian,
worker from Guatemala.
and a Serb worker from Guatemala, but he returned
Yeah,
back.
he returned, yeah.
So it's really cool to see other Christians from all around the world come, especially from Latin America.
Yeah.
That's really cool. But not many Hispanics that I've seen. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen.
I remember there was one time we were riding the train going, I don't really know where we were going, maybe to church. And all of a sudden we both heard Spanish, and Ray was like, oh, we're speaking Spanish. So he went over to him and he started talking to him, and
Yeah.
was just like asking him questions, and they were traveling here, right?
Yeah, they were from Mexico.
Yeah, from Mexico.
Wow, that must have been exciting.
Yeah, I'm like, hey,
Hey
I tried to
guys.
talk to them, yeah, and they were just like, oh yeah, he speaks Spanish. Oh wow.
Yeah.
Wow, it
So-
just hit me. And I know you mentioned it, but it just hit me. This is the second time you've had to do this, to be placed somewhere where you don't know the language and have to learn it.
Oh
'Cause
yeah.
with Spanish, right? With Spanish, you didn't know Spanish.
No, my parents did, but I that didn't know. But that took me a year to learn.
Okay.
As but I think that's a whole different situation too, because I was going to school, all Spanish school, all day, every day, Here we have our bubbles, right? So I get home and we probably will speak English. We should be speaking Japanese to each other, trying to practice more, but in reality, that doesn't happen. And then when you want to relax, we don't put Japanese TV on, right? Sometimes we do, but it's just, sometimes we just need to like watch something in English to kind of quiet our brains a little bit.
Yeah, no, I get it. My wife, she's from North Carolina, and she's living in northern Mexico basically at this point. And she's learning Spanish, and she wants us to talk Spanish in the home between the two of us. And it's hard sometimes, because it's like, but I just want to talk to you. Like, I don't want it to be like, well, let me correct this, and like I just want to talk to you. So it is hard. Though we have talked about doing like Netflix in Spanish or something to help us out. But
It's really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do watch TV in Japanese in the mornings, the news and a local like TV show. And input is very, very important. But yeah, sometimes you're just like, okay, it's Saturday, no Japanese.
let's just enjoy it for sure. And Megan, is the same true for you, as far as, this is me assuming because I'm looking at you through a camera, that you're white? I don't know if that's a fair assumption. Okay, just making sure. Is that true of you too, as far as like not interacting with other white people very often in Japan?
Our organization, outside of our organization, I would say no. Yeah, like what Ray said, if you're in Tokyo, you see a lot of foreigners, but even we're 20 minutes away from Tokyo, and when you do see a foreigner, you do a double take, because you're like, oh, it's one of us, like there's another one here. It's kind of shocking a little bit, because you go to a place or a country that's very homogenous, and so you definitely stick out. And I am pale, and I have kind of reddish hair, so I stick out. And Ray says he notices that people just stare at me. And I'm like, oh,
when we go to church, our church is more into like, we call it Inaka, which is like countryside a little bit. So it's a little bit further in. And we wait at the station, and people are like, oh, what are these foreigners doing here? Just looking at us, just curious, people are just curious.
But when you do hear English, and especially the North American accent, you think, oh, they're either Canadian or American.
Yeah. Wow. Are you from Dallas originally, Megan?
I'm from Fort Worth.
Fort Worth.
So,
Okay. So you went from being like the highest population or whatever, the majority, to
uh,
be not just a minority, but a minority. I mean, to
yeah,
the truest sense, not just like, oh, we make up 10%. Like, no, not even that. Wow, that's
yeah.
fascinating. That's fascinating. I'm just gonna go down to our questions 'cause I'm looking at the time and I'm loving this conversation, by the way. So this is this is random. Dr. Harrell, I think it was Dr. Harrell, had us read articles for ST about all sorts of stuff. And one of the articles he had us read was about a loneliness epidemic in Japan. And I don't know anything about Japan. I don't know, is this just American propaganda? Is it just like not really all that accurate, or is that true? And then I see videos on like YouTube or whatever of like these businesses where you can go and pay to snuggle people. Nothing sexual. You just go and you just have physical contact. That is how lonely people can be in Japan. Kind of what you said earlier, the hustle and bustle, the constant work, that they will pay just for 30 minutes of like, just touch my hand. So is that a fair characterization? Is it way too broad? Or what do you think about, or how would you address that or speak to that?
Yeah, I would definitely say that we do see an element of loneliness, and just, I don't want to say isolation, but just kind of being by themselves. So for example, restaurants, it's not uncommon for you to see individual spaces for people to sit and eat. And then you may have some tables for group eating. Whereas in the US, I feel like the majority, you rarely see it in an individual place.
Yeah.
Like a
Yeah, an
for one
individual
person.
stall for one person. But here, that's very, very common for people to eat by themselves.
Mhm.
On the trains, you don't see people really interacting with each other. They just kind of sit by themselves. And even with the introduction of social media and the digital age, people are constantly on their phones. So when they're walking, they're just looking on their phones and not really just kind of interacting with other
Yeah.
people.
Sometimes you see it when they're inebriated or drinking for work. That's when they're most sociable with their coworkers. You can see it like on the train, and you can see
Mm.
they went out to drink after work. But yes, I think the younger generation is more prevalent, right?
Yeah.
So back I have a sense this is what that back in the day, people were more communal, more aware of like what the neighbor was doing, what was going on. But nowadays, it's kind of like it's a communal society, but in many ways, it's very individualistic. So people is becoming more that way. So people, younger people, are just on their own or just doing their own thing. Yeah, it's become very prevalent, and those things do exist. Like you can go there every train station, if you have like a pretty big train station, they will have bars that have companions. So lots of them, like bars everywhere. Like in our station, they're just like everywhere. So Friday, Thursday nights, it's just like if you go out the train station, I'm walking home, and there's just a lot of people going to those bars. They call them girl bars, right? So, huh?
The maid bars.
And then they have maid cafes, but all of this is for companionship, right? It's not like anything sexual at all. Maybe sometimes it is, but it's really interesting to see, like, yes, people are trying to get a deeper connection with other people, but just in definitely probably the worst possible ways. Yeah, so there's an element of that, and trying to reach a society that's first, as a foreigner, we're already in the outside, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so engaging with Japanese people is very important, but finding meaningful ways to do that can be difficult because people are on the go all the time. So learning Japanese is a great connector because
Yeah.
they price like, oh, you know Japanese, so they'll have a conversation.
Yeah.
So
There's a YouTuber. I don't know if you know of him. His YouTube channel is called like Xiao Man or something like that.
Yeah, I've heard
Oh,
of the
yes, that's
Chinese. He
familiar.
speaks
Yeah,
Chinese.
he'll just go into like a nail salon and they'll
Yeah,
be
yeah,
talking bad about him, and then he'll just start talking their language, and the ladies are like, and
Yeah.
it's an
yeah,
immediate connection. They're like, "Oh my
yeah,
goodness, you know my language. Let's be friends now." And it like flips a switch. They go from, "Oh, this guy's weird and I don't like him," to, "This is amazing. Let me introduce you to my mother." And it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
fascinating what honoring them by learning their language does for people. It really is a powerful tool. Well, how have
Yeah,
you?
kind of a similar story of we went to this market once and there's a shirt that Ray liked and it had some kanji on it. And so at first the man was kind of just
Yeah,
not
this
really
shirt.
engaged like this shirt. And then Ray read the kanji to him and all of a sudden it was like a switch of, oh, and so he got like really happy and was
And
like, give
start
me the
talking.
bag, and they
Yeah,
started talking and you just saw the switch of, oh,
Mm,
you read kanji, you're a
yeah.
foreigner, you can read
You can
kanji.
read this. Yeah, that was
wow.
awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was.
that is super cool. How I don't really know what the question is because I'm still trying to think of it, but there is an obvious desire from people for community,
Mm.
and there's an obvious lack of community from what you have described. So how does the church in Japan kind of try to bridge that gap, or how has it tried to bridge that gap?
Ooh, that's a
Mhm.
difficult one because that's one that I'm trying to
Okay.
navigate. Missionary here, because most, like I said, most activities are done on Sunday.
Mhm.
Um, but there are things that are happening that are just like, for example, sports ministries.
Hmm.
One thing that is very big in Japan are hobbies.
Yeah.
So even from high school, they start doing these hobbies, whether that be sports or other types of hobbies. And Japanese people tend to be very good at something, right?
Mhm.
So if your focus is baseball, right? You would go all in on baseball if you really like it. Like you just the best equipment, go all in. Same thing with collectibles. Like
Mhm.
people love collecting things here, so they go all in collectibles, whether that be cards or figurines or just different types of hobbies. So there's a lot of these communities around hobbies that happen. That's a good way to connect.
Mm.
And the cities have community centers that have activities that connect people together. So I think the church engaging in these different spheres is very important in order to really reach out to Japanese people. I think it happens to a level, but not as much.
Mhm.
So, for example, our church has a basketball team and they participate in basketball tournaments with other non-Christian
Mhm.
people. So, trying to do that more is going to be really
Yeah.
important. It doesn't happen as often though, I think. Uh yeah, that's one thing. And then there's shrines, and we didn't talk about this. Shrines and temples are everywhere here.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
Mm.
they're Buddhist and Shinto is everywhere in Japan. And they do a lot of community events.
They do, yeah.
So and
Mm.
the community love that. There's tons of people who go to those events. So I'm thinking as a church,
Fascinating.
this is a way to engage because there's a need for engaging with
Right.
others. So, but
Right.
my mind is running, right? So
Yeah.
like, oh, this is a great idea. Maybe we can do this. This is a good
Great
idea. Yeah.
example,
Yeah, it's like the inverse, you know. There's all of those shrines all over the place and one church maybe. Whereas
Yeah.
here, there's churches all over the place and maybe one. I don't even think we have a Buddhist temple. I really don't, like in our area down here where I'm at. I really don't, but maybe there is somewhere, but it's just you don't see them, so you don't think about it. But it's just the reverse of that.
yeah. Mhm.
Wow. Wow. So I'll ask you, I'll ask you this question. How do you guys deal with homesickness?
Hmm.
Yeah, well, we're really blessed and fortunate to live in the digital age, so we are able to speak with our friends and family periodically.
Mhm.
We aren't able to do that weekly, but we are still able to speak to them on a regular basis, and I find that really helps to just connect with your loved ones back home.
Yeah.
But also, when it comes to homesickness, I think a lot of those feelings, or sometimes I just need to take it directly to the Lord and just be
Yeah.
really open and honest with Him and just explain this is how I'm feeling today. And, you know, sometimes He'll give me a scripture verse or one of my favorite worship songs. I'll just start playing in my own language. And, you know, I find that really comforting to listen to worship songs, like my favorite worship songs from back home, or even doing activities that I loved back home. I enjoy baking, or maybe I'll cook like one of our favorite American dishes. And
Mm,
I think those are practices that I've incorporated to kind of help when homesickness kind of hits you
Mhm. That's good.
pretty hard, you know.
Yeah, so American dishes, now Megan can make them, but when we got here, it's like, where do I find all these ingredients? You know, or it's kind of like a special treat because things tend to
Yeah.
be more expensive if it's like Western.
yeah.
So buy big bags of cheese in Texas, right? Because we have cheese and everything. But here is like a small little bag of cheese is quite expensive. So just navigating that, and like Megan said, there's certain things that we did home that we can do here,
Yeah.
that keep us in a or kind of encourage us, like even we enjoy like walking, hiking, or walking outdoors. We'll do that here. Maybe Western dishes. Maybe we want to have a good burger. There are not many burger spots. There's McDonald's, but
we know a
yeah,
good burger
we
spot.
know
Yeah.
now we need a burger spot that we can eat ourselves every once in a while. Yeah, so those are little things that we do kind of, and obviously speaking to family is easier.
Mhm.
But that can also become an unhealthy thing
can
if
be.
you like trying to speak to your family every single day. It's okay, but it can be, are you trying to hold on to that,
Right.
or are you processing that in a healthy way? So it's
Right.
important to take those kind of
Mhm.
challenges to the Lord.
Yeah.
And community looks different.
Yeah.
So I think that's also an important part. Having people around you that can help you process these, especially people who have been here for a while. So if like any missionary who's new, it's good to have experienced people because they've gone through deep homesickness, deep challenges to
Yeah.
help you navigate times when it's difficult, just to like process or go to the store, to the post office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you guys have that. How much does it cost to ship something to Japan or from Japan to the US? Have you guys ever had to do that? Like send a box?
We shipped some things from the US to Japan, and then
But,
we've had family ship stuff from the
yeah,
US to Japan.
it's
It's
probably like $80.
it's
Probably,
pricey.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
little pricey.
Okay.
Yeah,
like a box, yeah.
like a
Mail
pretty
items.
mail items are normal. Like I
Probably.
think we've mailed stuff to the States,
Mhm.
like in envelopes and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we have family who send us stuff sometimes.
And my friends.
Yeah, especially Spanish food. Like,
Yeah.
have you adobo, which we use a lot in Puerto Rican dishes?
Adobo. Okay.
It's they sell it in the States very cheap. It's probably like a couple bucks.
Okay.
Like, but here, like Amazon has it like for $30. And it was
Okay.
like, no way,
Yeah.
we can't. So
Right.
Megan sent that to us, which is really
Sazon.
nice. And Sazon,
Right.
yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
stuff like that. But yeah.
Yeah. It's gonna be my personal goal to get you guys a care package this year. Sometime this year. And I'll send you an email or a Facebook message just later and just see what you guys actually like to eat. But that's gonna be my personal goal. One last question, and then I'll be done with my questions. But um speak to someone who is thinking I may want to be a missionary, not necessarily to Japan, but I'd want to be a missionary. What would you tell them? What steps should they be taking? What kind of counsel would you give?
That's a good question.
It is.
Pray, and then learn. I think it's like each mission field, each mission organization has their requirements. What do you want to do, right? If you become a missionary, how has God equipped you? So learn about the possibilities of what mission looks like in different countries and cultures, what is required, what is needed, and how can you engage in that? Yeah, and then go on a trip, right? And kind of experience a little bit, maybe some short-term trip at your church or with the mission organization, and kind of experience what that looks like. Because involvement is broad, right? Their involvement can look like going and becoming a missionary, but involvement can also be like, maybe I'm not suited to go because it's just not the way God has designed me to go. But maybe I'm called to mobilize people, encourage people to pray for missionaries, encourage people to go on mission trips in my church. Those are things that are really needed, especially as we're missionaries here. Our support system back home is huge, right? And part of that is people that probably don't feel called to move to another country, but they are passionate for God's work and reaching people with the gospel. So they help people, mobilize people for prayer. They mobilize people for engagement, maybe going on short-term trips, learning about the need, engaging local people that are in their home countries that are from unreached people groups. We see that a lot in Texas. We have a lot of unreached people groups in Texas, and that's a whole ministry there that you can get involved with. So learning is a good posture. Praying, meeting people and other missionaries is a good thing to do. We love connecting people to God's mission work. So that's what we did in the States when we were home. And it's like stuff like this we love to do because we love encouraging others to get involved in what God is
And thank you for doing it. I'll include y'all's like giving link and the link for OMF and just stuff like that so that people, I'll just put a bunch of links just so that people know more about y'all, but also about ministry in Japan and all of those kinds of things. But thank you guys so much for making time to do this. I super appreciate it, and I'm super encouraged by a conversation.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
This is so much fun.
We've enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm gonna end the meeting in a little bit. If y'all could just stay on for another minute, I have like one more question that's unrelated to the podcast. But thanks again. And hey, anyone watching, again, like, subscribe, leave a comment, all of those goodies. I really appreciate y'all. Thank you.